Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Africa, tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze.
You are listening to African Father in America podcast by Simon Javanokelo, live from Seattle, Washington, USA.
Thank you all for joining us for today's episode of the Daily African Proverbs. We're in the African Father in America club on Clubhouse, and this is being recorded for the African Father in America podcast. We are currently broadcasting live on YouTube, and also we are also broadcasting live on Clubhouse. And today I'm really privileged to be here with the wonderful Gogo Rutendo Ngara from South Africa, who is going to be, my guest today. And really, it's really a privilege and an honor to have you. It means a lot that you took the time to join us today. Here in the Daily African Proverbs, every single day we gather and we dissect African proverbs. We pick one African proverb, we hear different people's perspectives about the proverb. And our hope is that by the end of our conversation, the show that we are having now, we each go our way with a little bit of African wisdom, so that we can be a little more confident, but also we can make our ancestors smile, because these proverbs that we share are not new. They are things that my mother used to share with me when I was younger, and I'm so persistent that my daughters can also benefit from the proverbs that I learn and bring to them on a day-to-day basis. So today we have a Nigerian proverb that says, "One who rides the horse of greed at a gallop will pull it up at the door of shame." One who rides the horse of greed at a gallop will pull it up at the door of shame. And I want to, just quickly pass it to Gogo Rutendo Ngara to, share with us what she thinks when she hears this proverb, and then we will continue the conversation. But I do want to welcome on Clubhouse, I see that Mala and Sarah and Easy have joined us, and I will let you all know who else is joining us on YouTube. But if you're on YouTube, please remember to leave us a comment so that we can also, mention you and what you're thinking as we continue with the conversation. So Gogo, the microphone is now yours.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you for the invitation. And thank you for working with African Proverbs. I love working with African Proverbs. I think they're just such a source of wisdom. And when this one reaches me now, one who rides the horse of greed at a gallop will pull it up at the door of shame. Immediately what comes to mind for me is the Kemetic principle of Ma'at, which here in Southern Africa renders itself as Ubuntu. And Ma'at is it's often depicted as a woman with an ostrich feather in her hair, or she is holding a scale, and she's got in one pan she's got an ostrich feather, and then in the other pan she's got the heart. And Ma'at really is about balance, divine law. It's about truth, and mostly it's about love. And within this, it's about interdependence, interconnectedness, and interrelatedness. And if there's no interdependence, if there is interdependence, interconnectedness, and interrelatedness, if we acknowledge that we are one with everything and everything is our relative, then we cannot have greed. And by the same token, the Southern African Ubuntu principle of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the all-pervasive force, the singularity, the dynamic still point. It is the universal being that animates and subsists through all life. And Ubuntu renders itself in four main categories. And the first of those categories is Muntu, or the reasoned being, or the person. And when we get the plural of that, it is Bantu. So we're all Bantu because Ubuntu manifests through that. But this also incorporates all deities and, our ancestors, those who have walked before, those who are walking now, and those who are yet to come. But then Untu does not end there. It also manifests itself in unreasoned things. It manifests itself in minerals. It manifests itself in things, things that don't necessarily have the mind of the human. And as it does this, interestingly enough, trees do not fall under Kintu, which is this particular category, but under Muntu as persons, because they allow the movement, of between different realms, between the past, the present, and the future. And then Untu also renders itself in Hantu, in time and space, and where time and space collapse into a single continuum, which quantum physics has only discovered in the past 100 years. And then Untu also renders itself in modalities, in things that are intangible, in fear, in wonder, in beauty. And so Untu, when we speak about Ubuntu, we're speaking about the interrelatedness between all these forms of life. And when we're related to all those forms of life, we cannot be greedy, because we realize that we share all of life with all things. And so what this proverb speaks to me about is that when we jump onto the horse of greed, when we do not acknowledge that we are one with everything, when we do not acknowledge that we are one with the other, whoever the other may be, whether it is another Muntu, whether it is a Kintu, a thing, whether it is time and space, or whether it is a modality, then we will end up at the door of shame, because we'll have lost our connectedness with Untu. So that's what comes to mind when I hear the proverb. It's telling us, that we really need to adhere to the principle of Ma'at, which is the principle of interconnectedness, interdependence, and the principle of...
Wow. Thank you so much. I think you just summarized the whole conversation we are going to have today, and just your wisdom is really, really appreciated, and thank you for your interpretation, for today's proverb. I just want to welcome everyone who is joining us on Clubhouse. Faline, thank you so much for joining us. Easy and Sarah, and I see Wanda. I encourage you to ping in people into the room if you're on Clubhouse. And if you're joining us on YouTube, thank you so much. Leave us your comment with your thoughts to Gogo Rutendo Ngara, who is our special guest today, and also with your thoughts about today's proverb. The proverb says, one who rides the horse of greed at a gallop will pull it up at the door of shame. And now we want to quickly learn about Gogo's story. When you are between 8 to 12, I love asking this question to my guests, because that was also around the time when I realized that I will always be the leader that I am becoming. I will always be someone that creates events and initiatives with the hope of creating opportunities for young people, especially from the slums. And someone who is leveraging the power of music and film and platforms like social media to change the narrative about Africa. And I learned this when I was about 8 years old. I used to be a milk and bread distributor in one of the biggest slums in Kenya. It's called Manyata. My mom was basically a single mom, but she was a second wife in a polygamist marriage. So she had to move away from home and support all of us. We were about 9 in total in our family, my biological siblings. And then she started an orphanage home in the midst of the HIV crisis in the 90s. And so I learned community service, and I learned how to give without even thinking of receiving. But I love asking this question, because that moment when I was on the bicycle every morning, while my colleagues, other students like me, did not have similar opportunities. They were just being children, And so I love asking that question, because I feel that that's the moment that drives me. And whenever I think about that moment, I feel like I need to wake up early today so that I can keep trying. So share with us a similar story, and also paint for us a picture. Share with us some colors of where that was. Maybe if there are some smells that you remember until today, from that moment that inspired who you are today. Thank you so much, and welcome Welcome, Kat. The room on Clubhouse is filling up with a lot of amazing people. I've been promoting this conversation, Gogo, for a while. And so we have other spiritual leaders from across the African diaspora listening and watching. And your presence means a lot to us.
Thank you so much, Simon. Wow. Okay, between the ages of 8 and 12, I had traveled around a lot, not obviously of my own volition, but with my parents until that age, around Southern Africa and other African countries, because Zimbabwe, where I was born, was going through its struggle for liberation. And a time that sticks out for me in that period is 1986. Zimbabwe is 6 years into independence. But a lot of the trappings of the colonial era are still in place. And I am at school, I'm in grade 6, and at a public school, but that was still largely European, and largely the teachers were largely of European descent. And one day, a young girl in grade 1, a 6-year-old girl, comes to me in tears at school, after school, and tells me that one of the teachers, a male teacher, a white male teacher, had touched her inappropriately. And she was absolutely traumatized and absolutely in tears. And it was known that this teacher had a penchant for little girls. And I kind of felt enough was enough, and I took it upon myself to bring justice, to bring in ma'at. And I went to the headmistress and demanded that the teacher be fired or arrested, or some action is taken, because he cannot be destroying little girls' lives through defiling them, especially at such a young age. The reward I got for my actions was that I became completely victimized by teachers and students alike, or the teachers started inciting students against me. And in one particular incident, all the boys in my grade then decided they wanted to play a game with me that they called Kitcheners. And this game was a game where we played soccer with a tennis ball. And the aim was there were teams, and those teams were trying to get the ball in between one person's legs in order. And then once it got there, everybody would beat them up. And so I was the only girl that was then invited into this game. And soon I realized that there were indeed two teams. There was me alone on the one team, and there were 30 boys on the other team, and everybody else was against me. And they did everything during that whole game in order to try and get this tennis ball to go into my legs. Eventually it did, as it would if 30 boys are trying to do that. And then they got their reward, which was to beat me. And I was literally beaten and pummeled by 30 boys. And I remember a force moving through me as this was happening. And I walked towards the classrooms as I could tell the break time was about to be over. And I swore I would not cry. And I swore I would stand up for justice. And as I was feeling kind of this pummeling from 30 fists and 30 hands, I walked with all the dignity I could muster up, until eventually they saw some teachers, they dissipated and they stopped. And I walked into the classroom, I sat down, I pulled out my classroom books, and I continued as if nothing had happened. And I think that has molded me in many ways, because and it did not stop me, by the way, trying to get justice, for the little girl and all other little girls. Eventually, I was made head girl simply because I was so obstinate, and I wouldn't be deterred by anything. And I think that if I think of how that has molded me in my life, I then went on to go to a boys' school for A levels because I wanted to study physics. You know, because there was no physics at my girls' school where I was at for my O levels, because you know what, girls can't do physics. You know, and I was the only girl in a class, you know, full of boys. You know, in one of the groups. I then went on to study engineering, where I endured a lot of racial discrimination, a lot of gender discrimination, and I was in a different country, so a lot of xenophobia as well. You know, and I was one of 6 girls and 100 guys, and I've tended to find myself in situations where I have had to fight for my own justice, but also fight for justice for others. So, in keeping with the proverb today, and my interpretation of it is, I think that experience really pummeled into me the principle of Ma'at and what it means to live according to the principle of Ubuntu, which is to see all things as interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent. Because even as those boys were hitting me, I knew it was coming from a place of pain inside them, and that I was going to transmute that pain within me. And I think that is, you know, something that has really molded who I've become today.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, while the microphone was off, I was just saying, oh my God, you know, because the way you explain things and also the way you explain the principles of my heart, you know, we need to have more of this in our day-to-day living. And African spirituality, traditional African spirituality has been neglected completely. And I feel like it's part of what you're speaking to, because the kind of greed that these 30 boys had, you know, that made them feel like even not even one of them thought that, you know, she's a human being too. Their goal was just to accomplish this act of greed and violence because of what was inside of them. But how you are able to transcend that moment and see what's in them, but also see what's in society, you know, the need to fight for justice for the downtrodden, you know, it's really, really powerful. And I feel that it speaks to African spiritual traditions that have been neglected, I don't know for how long now. I wanted you to speak to that a little more, so that, you know, if we have, I know that young African people are in the audience right now, and I just want you to give us a little bit of history and where African spiritual traditions are in the moment, and where you see the future looking like.
Thank you so much. You know, it's interesting when you were speaking just now and relaying, you know, mirroring back to me the story that I told. The first thing, or the first person that came to mind, was a great liberation fighter, a great prophet, a great what we call a Mondoro in Zimbabwe, called Mbuyane Handa, you know, who fought in the Chimurenga War for liberation. And she led armies essentially, and was eventually hanged by the British. And as she was dying, she declared that one day my bones shall rise again. And she was a medium. She was a spirit medium. She was what they call a mondoro, which is what here we call them a sanusi, a high shaman. You know, a high shaman, one who's connected to all the principles of Ma'at. And she took all those principles of Ma'at, all those principles of Ubuntu, and she took them into bringing justice, you know, bringing order, or fighting for justice, or standing for justice, or walking for justice, or singing for justice, you know, bringing the spirit and the ancestors in to the liberation struggle, you know, in the realms of politics, in the realms of economics, in the realms of war, in the realms, you know, of education, in the realms of how society comes together. And that is a quintessential aspect of what African spirituality is. African spirituality is interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent with everything. It cannot be separated. So, unlike in a Western paradigm where you have, for instance, a paradigm of dualism where you separate the mind from the body, or you separate spirit, spirit from, you have a secular and you have religion, or you have, these silos in which things fit into. When we come into African spirituality and African traditions, it is the ability to be connected at all levels with all things, knowing that we are connected in as much as the past, the present, and the future. And this is something that when we look into West Africa, the principle of Sankofa teaches us, because it tells us to look back into the past, into the present, and feed that to create a better future. But when we also look at the principle of Sankofa, we're looking at a universal principle that is embedded in a single symbol of a bird turning back, upon itself with an egg, or a seed in its beak. And it is actually a universal principle of feedback that you find in all layers of science. You find it in the market, you find it in economics, you find it in climatology, you find it in our respiratory system, you find it in engineering systems, you find it everywhere. And when we're speaking African spirituality and African traditions, this is what it is. It is an all-pervasive knowledge that is able to cut across all paradigms, because as we've said, Ntu moves through everything, through all realms. And when you're truly one within African spirituality, you're one who's understanding the interconnectedness, the interrelatedness, and the interdependence upon all things. When we go around the continent, it has different manifestations. It is practiced differently, but I think there's always an understanding that we're not separated from our ancestry. We're not separated from those who have walked before us. And when we're talking about our ancestry, we're not only talking about those who share a genetic code with us, but we're also talking about our original ancestor, which is the mountains, which is the rivers, which is the ocean, which is the caves, which is the clouds, which is the sun, which is the stars. They are also our ancestors, and they are what have made us who we are today. And so we then prepare in African spirituality to become the ancestors of tomorrow. And so the way we live our life, living according to the principles of Ubuntu, or living according to the principles of Ma'at, is so that we can become the ancestors that are guiding the future. So yeah, it is a completely transdisciplinary spirituality, if I might put it there. It's also transsectional, it is also transversal, in that you cannot separate anything from anything, because everything has cause and effect. And of course, if you go into quantum physics, you start understanding some principles of African spirituality. You start understanding, for instance, how ritual can be a solution for societal breakdown. You start understanding how a sacred site, a sacred river, can help an economic problem, a recession. Engaging with it in the right way. You start understanding how polluting rivers equates and brings on the energy of gender-based violence to young girls. You start understanding, all of this, when you start understanding the principles of African spirituality and the traditions around the continent. But you also understand the different archetypal energies, and some traditions are more developed in this than others. So for instance, in Kemet or ancient Egypt, you see very specific deities, which are really archetypal energies that tell us about the structure of the universe. You might find similar ones, for instance, in the Yoruba tradition, where you also find the Orishas, etc., which tell us about the different archetypal energies that come together to form the patterns that inform the universe and, the reality that we live in. And so different traditions show this in a different way, and they're able to work with time, because Hantu, that other aspect of Hantu, is also important. They work with time as well, and they use time through divination. They're able to predict, forward time. They're able to look into past time through various forms of divination, which are just mathematical principles using either, your base 2 or your base 4 or your base 8 or your base 16, which really just tell us about the universal principles and the universal creation. And while we're talking divination, for instance, something like here in Southern Africa, we call it throwing the bones, or in the Yoruba may call it, doing the Ifa, or whatever, divination systems we're talking about. These are highly mathematical principles and highly mathematical constructs, and they're based upon the very same principles that are allowing us to communicate today through the internet. That is based on pretty much the same principles. So African spirituality is that which ties all of existence together.
Wow. I can't take all of this in at once. So I would love to have you, I think we need to do a series, where we do this a few more times, because this is so much. I'm so moved, because I've wanted to meet someone who can actually articulate African spirituality the way you just did. And I'm so grateful to Jane Aidu for connecting us. It took a little over 2 months to be able to have this conversation today. So I really, really thank you. There's one person that Jane Aidu talks about a lot. Whenever I've interviewed him in the past, he talks about Credo Mutua. And I want you to share with everyone who is listening who he was and the impact he still has today. But while you think about that, I want to just welcome everyone on Clubhouse. I see that the room there is growing. I want to give a quick shout out to Mala and Kat, the Hungry Medium. Thank you so much for all that you do. And also in the audience, I see Sarah and Izzy and Faline and Wanda and Kay and Karen and Lani and Lewis, Awino. For the next 3 minutes, I'll accept hand raising, so you can join us on stage, so that later on you can share your comments and just words of encouragement to Gogo Rutendo Ngara, who is my special guest, and you can also share a bit of your perspective on the proverb. But really, I also want to thank Nana and Ra and Jay and Noah for joining us for today's conversation. That is on Clubhouse, and then on YouTube, I see that the Lees have joined us, and thank you again for being so consistent with your support here on YouTube. And one of the things that the Lees is saying here is that Gogo Rutendo, the Lees is saying that you remind her of powerful women from her Mijikenda culture. Mijikenda is one of the biggest tribes in Kenya. It's a tribe that has several other tribes in it, and she's comparing you to a warrior from the Mijikenda tribe that helped fight the colonizers, Mekatilili Wamenza. I'm sure you know of Mekatilili. And then she also says here that, I just want to make sure I give her the honor, that through her Mijikenda traditions and spirituality, we were able to offer through the spiritual movement in the Mijikenda tribe, that's how we were able to liberate Kenya from colonization. And really what she's saying reminds me of that moment when you are surrounded by 30 boys. The game you are describing is very similar to a game we played in Kenya. It's called Chobu, where if the ball goes in between your legs, you have to run and catch maybe the nearest goalpost or something, and that's what would rescue you from the beating. But just the way you stood up was like a warrior. As you are describing that, I was thinking of a warrior, and like the women warriors in Black Panther movie. That was the image that was in my mind. And also it reminded me really of the Mau Mau. These are people that fought the British Army with very, with machetes. And also people don't know, but the African warriors like the Mau Mau, they made their own guns. They visually saw the white man's weapons, and they went and made their own similar to that. And many people don't know how that is extremely innovative. Building an industry in the midst of a war with weapons that you've never seen. And so that is also something that I feel you can't accomplish unless you're very, very spiritually grounded. And so if you're joining us, Gogo Rutendo Ngara is also going to do a grounding to close our conversation today. So stay put in case you're with us. But now I want us to go to Credo Muthwa. Who was he, and what was his impact, and what can we learn from him?
So I'll say Credo Mutwa was a genius. And when I use the word genius, I'm going to use the original meaning of the word genius. It is said that genius is being faithful to one's attendant spirit or calling. Being a genius is being true to the invisible and pervasive force that is present at one's birth and that which breathes life into exceptional natural ability. And this is what Credo Mutwa was. Credo Mutwa was born on the 21st of July, 1921. And on the 21st of July this year, he would have turned 100 years old. But he passed away last year on the 25th of March. He surrendered to the realms of the ancestors a mere day before South Africa went into lockdown because of COVID-19 pandemic, which by then had been declared a pandemic. And this raised many alarms for people because Credo Mutwa, in his almost 99 years of life until then, had issued many, many, many prophetic warnings during his lifetime about a time such as this that we're in. Credo Mutwa was a seer, he was a sage, he was a healer, he was a cosmologist, he was a teacher, he was a philosopher, he was a historian, he was an artist, he was a playwright, he was an orator, he was a sculptor, he was a writer, he was a storyteller, he was an environmentalist, he was a builder, and he was a custodian of indigenous wisdom. He was a keeper of indigenous wisdom. We often speak of Da Vinci as a polymath. This was a true polymath. He was a master of many, many trades. And he's what we call a guardian of Umlando, the ancient histories of Africa. And he was faithful to all of them. He was faithful to all of his callings. So therefore, he was a true genius. And he traveled throughout Africa and even throughout the world in search of the ancient mysteries that govern reality and that govern the world in which humanity finds itself. There were very few countries in the continent that he did not walk, few waters of the continent that did not see his reflection. There were few caves, few faces, few mountains that he did not transcend because he was always looking for knowledge, which he presented in his seminal book called Indaba, My Children, which was published in 1964, where he really traverses through the ancient mysteries of Africa. Even though he was rooted as a Zulu man because he was born in Zululand, in the then Zululand in South Africa, he displayed what is truth in African spirituality through his book, Indaba My Children, but also through his paintings, also through his sculptures, also through his plays that he wrote, also through the philosophical discussions that he did, also through how he advised many, many, many people, across the world, and also as a healer. He was also a traditional healer, a Sanusi, one who's connected to the high knowledges and is connected to all. Credo Mutwa was one who really lived the principles of interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and interdependence at all levels. He was one who was a true advocate for Ma'at, a true advocate for Ubuntu.
Thank you so much. The theme of interconnectedness and oneness is really strong in African spirituality, and I almost feel like being here in the Daily African Proverbs is beginning to expose me to that, because every proverb involves everyone. Every proverb has several parts. We as the participants who have to talk about the proverb, the people who wrote it, and then even in interpreting each proverb, it's broken into at least two parts, but it just has one meaning, of how we should always ground ourselves in who we are, and how earlier on you are speaking of our ancestors not just being our human ancestors, but also being the mountains and the rivers and nature. And one of the things that are going on now is that Africa is facing so many challenges. And our ancestors, the mountains, the rivers, the minerals are being misused, not only by foreigners, but also by Africans themselves. So I wanted you to just speak a little bit to the challenges that Africa is facing right now, and then some of the ways that African spirituality can be a solution. And then from there, I will invite three of our amazing friends on stage on Clubhouse to just share their comments, their thoughts about this proverb, and share any question that they might have for you. But I'm really, really grateful to everyone's presence, especially everyone on Clubhouse. Thank you for waking up early in the morning to join me for the Daily African Proverbs. We do this every single day, 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I'm working so hard so that we can ensure that every day we also have, spiritual leaders and guests and people that can strengthen our fight against against things in this life that weaken us and make it so hard for us to accomplish our visions, and for us to be steady and steadfast African people, because really it has to be us who are telling our story, and to tell the African story in a confident way. You have to surround yourself with people like Gogo Rutendo Ngara, and I feel like today I'm being given enough fuel to continue doing this work for several years to come. So I want to pass it to you. Share with us some of the challenges that you see Africa is facing, and how African spirituality could also be one of the solutions.
Well, Africa faces many challenges, but I'm going to tell the story of a river. And this river is born in the highlands of Guinea. And it comes up about 240 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean. And this river, according to what science tells us, ideally should travel that 240 kilometers from the highlands all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, because a river's natural course is to empty itself into the ocean that refuses no river. Except this river does not do that. Instead of traveling from the highlands of Guinea into the Atlantic Ocean, it moves northeasterly into the Sahara Desert. And it keeps moving into the Sahara Desert. And then it turns sharply at what was once Timbuktu and starts to move through different countries, through Nigeria, through a number of countries, until eventually it becomes a huge delta in which you find some of the greatest biodiversity on the continent, in which you have more than 40 different cultural groups, in which you have an abundance of providence that nature can provide. And instead of traveling 240 kilometers, taking the shortest and most efficient route, as it is following this long route via the desert and turning around and going before finally emptying into the Atlantic Ocean, it then travels over 4,200 kilometers in order to empty this. And as it does this, because it sometimes moves not in a downward gradient, but sometimes it moves in an upward gradient, sometimes it moves horizontally, it loses a lot of its flow and it loses a lot of its efficiency. But this loss of its flow and this loss of its efficiency is what gives rise to the Niger Delta. So the river I'm talking about is the Niger River. And this river, through traveling this long, winding route, which is inefficient, according to what science would tell us, actually gives rise to so much abundance, so much sustenance, and so much potential for life. However, because it does that, there's also a great deal of oil in the area. And so the whole Niger Delta is at great risk, because of, we spoke earlier about greed, because of the greed for fossil fuels, which is not only doing away with the land, our ancestors, in its original form, but it is also doing away with all of that ecological biodiversity that is the Niger Delta. And so it is actually becoming a site not for prosperity, a site not for abundance, a site not for the interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and interdependence of all things, but a site of ecocide. It is everything is starting to die. And I think this river tells us a little bit about the challenges of Africa. You know, Africa has long traditions, just like the long route that the river takes. Africa also has obscure traditions because it is an obscure route that this river takes. It baffled geologists for centuries trying to figure out how does a river go inward into the desert. It turns, it goes around that instead of doing the efficient route traveling that 240 kilometers. And this obscurity, and this long-windedness has rendered the West, and who primarily had become the colonizers, into rendering all that is Africa as illegitimate, as invalid, as unimportant, as superstition, and the lists of berating adjectives we can use towards Africa comes around. Meanwhile, and what this has done to the African psyche is that the psyche has started also to doubt, as you've said, that it actually holds all of this, because actually what that river is showing us is how indigenous knowledge travels. It is seemingly inefficient, but it is highly effective. It takes a long route. I mean, how many times have you asked a question to an elder and they'll take you on a long journey in a story before actually coming to tell you what the answer is? And in it, there's lots of proverbs, there are riddles, there are metaphors, and there are all sorts of things that are really asking you not to just listen with your rational mind, but also listen with your spirit to hear what it is. And unfortunately, our ability to listen with our spirits in Africa is, I won't say it's dead, but it is highly, highly, highly subverted. And so this, of course, and this lack of knowledge of self, and this how we've been labeled by the external world as, of course, they're taking away the resources, then becomes the challenge that we see of the so-called dark continent that was split up, in the Berlin conference, where we now have boundaries and borders, where we now other each other instead of seeing each other as interdependent, interconnected, and interrelated. Where here in South Africa, we often suffer from xenophobia, where anybody who comes from across a river, from what is so-called another country that is a boundary that was not a boundary, that was the boundaries of Africa before, is seen as a threat, and the list goes on. And this impacts all the systems, whether it's the educational systems, whether it is the political systems, whether it is the economic systems, etc. And coupled with a very large inequality, then we have what we then term as poverty. And I'd like to see the poverty that we're suffering from not necessarily as an economic poverty, but a poverty of spirit. And I think this is the key challenge that Africa is facing today, but it is still there. I think it is still there. There are still keepers and holders. There's still memory, and there's still the ability to see and listen with the dream. And so what Africa needs is for us to remember. And when I use the word remember, I'm using it in three ways. Remember in terms of bringing back memory, but also remember by bringing back all the fragments together, bringing the members back together, and then reminding us all that we are one member, reminding us all that we're community. And this principle that I'm speaking about of remembering is what in Africa we can call by the deity called Yemaya, we can call her Oset, we can call her Nomkubulwane. She goes by many names. She's the feminine principle. So what Africa is suffering from is that a lot of the feminine principle, which our great Sanusi Credo Mutwa called the mother mind, has been severely subverted by the ravages of slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and all globalization, modernity, and everything else.
Wow, thank you very much. The mother mind of Africa has been lost. That's the biggest challenge that Africa is facing, and that's the biggest work that we have. All of us who are listening, that's the biggest job that we have. And now I want to pass the microphone to the amazing Mala so that she can just share her thoughts about today's conversation, the proverb, and any just words of encouragement to Gogo, Rutendo, Ngara, and then we'll go to the my dear friend Kat, and then Kay. Thank you so much. Mala, the mic is yours.
Good morning and greetings to everyone. I know we're in various different time zones, but my sister, it has just been amazing to meet you in this way, to hear the ways that Spirit, has used you to amplify this message of Ubuntu. I'm here I'm going to be the voice of myself and the Hungry Medium. She's not able to come off mic at this moment, so we'll go after me to Kay. But when I think about the proverb, there's really you took all the meat, the bones, and the crumbs. So for the sake of time and anyone who wants to engage with you, I don't want to take up my time in that way, because the things that I would speak to, you have so eloquently spoken to. But I just am the things about what you shared, all of what you shared felt like rememory. And that theme of rememory comes from a film that a sister here in the States has on Netflix called In Our Mother's Gardens. And it's also echoed in a film that another sister did here in the States called Eyes on the Prize, Hallowed Ground. And the ways in which we are all displaced, but experiencing similar things, and that we need this awareness. We need to be called to awareness. We need to know what is happening on the continent as well as down the street from us and around the corner. And so when I think about what you shared as a 12-year-old girl, I am just in awe of the ancestors' ability to protect you, and that something that was meant to destroy you absolutely catapulted you, because we have so many instances of both and everything in between. So I count it a privilege to have this time in this moment. Simon, I always, it's just always beautiful, the spaces that you curate, the rooms that you have. So to everyone that is on YouTube and those of us here on Clubhouse, we have to continue to amplify the work of Simon and African Father, in America podcast and the Daily African Proverbs room, because we really are building community, but we also are being called back to our technology, to the work of our ancestors, so that we can be motivated, inspired, and encouraged to do more with what we have where we are. So this is Marla, and I'm complete, and I'll pass it back to you, Simon, but Kay will be next.
Thank you so much, Mother. I'm so grateful for your support, and thank you for helping with promoting today's conversation as well. I want to just thank everyone else who is in the room. I want to pass it to Kay Benjamin to share just a brief comment on today's proverb, or any comment to our wonderful special guest Gogo Rutendo Ngara. And then from there we will go into the grounding session led by Gogo Rutendo Ngara. Thank you so much for being here. Kay, the mic is yours.
Hello to everybody. And thank you, Simon, for introducing me to Maria. And Maria, thank you for sharing your strength. I'm absolutely amazed that I did not cry when you told your story, because I'm a crier. But that's not all I am. And from you telling your story and my not crying, it gave me a strength to move on. I would get paralyzed. By things to live in what is supposed to be. I'm in the United States right now, the greatest country, and the wealthiest country, and however it is described, and that we have people who are homeless and don't have food, and we still think going to war is a way to solve things. It's absolutely uncivilized. A a couple years ago, started saying Mayat every day, the 42 principles. And I said to myself at one point, well, what if, people are still the same to each other and to you? What if, it doesn't work? And I found out, because I chose to still move forward, that's where I found glory. And when I think of people who are oppressed somehow with women, when I think of apartheid, when I think of colonialism, somehow we take on the vestiges of the oppressor, the negative vestiges. And I think with colonialism, however they were gotten out of different countries, that the people who pass the torch, or however it's going to be perceived, are going to pass it to people like them. And so we have not dealt with that energy, that spirit of colonialism. And to me, the Sankofa is telling us, look back to spirit, look back to your source. And I understand that the purpose, the passion in your purpose must be more powerful than your pain. And I thank you for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kay, for sharing, powerful words, and also for your vulnerability. And now I want to pass it to Gogo Rutendo Ngara to just, maybe share responses to Mala and Kat and also Kay, and then do a grounding to close us out. But really, before that, I want to thank everyone in the room on Clubhouse. I see Karen, I see Roger, I see Georgina, and we've been joined by people from Singapore to Seattle, Washington to Nairobi. It's just a privilege to be here with all of you. And if you're watching on YouTube, like the Liz, thank you so much. And please leave your comment with what today's proverb means to you. The proverb we've been discussing is, one who rides the horse of greed at a gallop will pull it up at the door of shame. And my special guest today has been Gogo Rutendo Ngara, who has taught us so much. We've talked about the proverb, we've talked about her story, when she was 8 to 12 years old. We've talked about African spirituality, spiritual African traditions. We talked about Credo Muthwa, and we talked about challenges facing Africa. And now we are going to, listen to the moment of grounding, and then we'll wrap up our conversation. The microphone is yours, my dear sister.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to thank so much to those who have spoken, both in word that I could hear, or written, or in spirit. And just to my sisters, thank you. I think when you say you were not able to cry, even though you're a crier, it was so that I could find my own tears. And this is what African spirituality is about. We carry for each other, And to my other sister who spoke of the warrior, and I'd never understood that what I was called to, I guess, was the spirit of the warrior. And I actually do martial art. I'm a martial artist as well. And this has really taught me that peace is the ultimate weapon of any warrior. And when you find it within yourself, then you're able to conquer anything. And that is the heart of African spirituality. And so, in line with trying to bring in that peace, I invite everybody just to, if you're sitting, to make sure your feet are firmly on the ground. If you're able, just to lie down for about 5 minutes. And I invite you also to place your tongue on the roof of your mouth, inside your mouth. No one has to see it, because what we're doing is we're closing a circuit within us, a circuit of energy. And I invite you just to take a very deep breath in And to exhale. And then to breathe in. To exhale. And another deep breath in. And exhale. And I invite you to keep breathing as we call in the all-pervasive spirit of Africa, the origin, the cradle of humanity, the cradle of life. We breathe in generations of ancient ones, the forebears who sit in circle, who breathe within us, who surround us, who ignite us, who empower us. We breathe in all ancestors from 7 directions, those of the east, those from the west, those from the north, from the south, those from above, those from below, and those from the center. And we exhale. And we breathe in all those great ones of Sankofa, those of the ancient past, those who are birthing an ancient future, and those who live now at the confluence of time and timelessness. And we exhale. And we breathe in the great mothers, the nurturers, the creators. We breathe in the great fathers, the holders, the protectors. We call in the great warriors who exist in feminine and masculine form. And we exhale. We breathe in the flowing spirits of the moon and the water, the still spirits of the earth and the mountains, the fiery spirits of the suns, the cleansing spirits of the air and the wind, the spirits of nature. And we exhale. We breathe in the eagle, the falcon, the hawk who sees it all. We breathe in the lion heart who reveres it all. We breathe in the elephantine matriarch who remembers it all. And we exhale. We breathe in the wisdom of the Nile River, the nourisher of great civilizations, the bringer of Ma'at, she who tracks first time. We breathe in the obscurity of the Niger River, who takes not the most efficient route to the ocean, but the long, winding, accommodating route, the effective route. And we exhale. We breathe in the power of the Congo River, who brings the deepest healing from the deepest wounds of Africa. We breathe in the meanderings of the Zambezi, the mighty curtain of water in Musiwatunya, the waters of life from the great dryings of Mahadi Khadi. And we exhale. We breathe in the Senku River, the Harip or the Orange River, who carries the wisdoms of our ancient Barwa, the Batwa, our First Nations peoples, our common ancestors. And we exhale. We breathe in the ancient wisdoms from within. We breathe in the activisms from without, and we breathe in the visionaries that are yet to come. We breathe in the whisperers of Untu, those who plant seeds, those who plant collective seeds of consciousness, who raise Bantu, Hantu, Kintu, Kuntu into an interwoven web of connectedness. We breathe in the creative powers of our sacred spaces and places throughout the world, and we exhale. And we breathe in the great baobab, the tree of life, as we call in the breath. We breathe in the cycles of creating. We call in this year, this month, this day, this hour, this minute, this moment in time and timelessness. We honor the great ancestors who unite us all. We call in Sanusi Credo Mutua. We call in mitochondrial Eve. We breathe together. We dream together. We see together. We recreate together. We renew together. We regenerate together. We are agents of the future calling. We are one. Tokozani, Kamagu, Ashe.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful. That was moving, and I'm really grateful to you, Gogo Rutendo Ungara, for making the time. It means a lot. If it was in my village in Kenya that you visited me and we shared this moment and had all these special guests with us, I would have probably slaughtered a very nice goat from from all the goats that we have, and made for you vegetables from our garden. So I just hope that you feel like I treated you that way. But I hope that we will be able to bring you back for another session, because we can't get this type of lessons and grounding from anywhere else. This is your gift, and we would love for you to share it with us one more time. So I will be reaching out to you again. And with that, we are going to wrap up our conversation. I would love for you actually to just share with everyone who is listening how they can stay connected with you.
Okay. I'm not a social media person, so I can't give you any handles, but I can give my email address. It is FENGXIANTHT. So that's Feng, FENGXIANTHT @gmail.com. So Fengxian is my warrior name. It means immortal phoenix.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful. And we are going to wrap up our conversation today. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube, remember to leave us with your comments after you've watched the conversation. Share with us your thoughts, and also share with us your thoughts about the proverb for today. And the proverb is, one who rides the horse of greed at a gallop will pull it up at the door of shame. Thank you all so much. And if you're on Clubhouse, if you haven't followed the African Father in America Club, please do so that next time we have Gogo Rutendo Ngara, or we have the Daily African Proverbs, you will also be able to join us. But I do want to let you all know that tomorrow we are hosting author Malik Aduni, who just recently published an amazing children's book. So join us at the same time, 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 4 p.m. East African Time. I am so grateful. And Gogo, have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
African Father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Africa, tujikaze, tujikaze, America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze.
You are listening to African Father in America podcast by Simon Javan Okello, live from Seattle, Washington.